Alright, so for this project, I was tasked with modifying the file system in Minix, specifically updating the inode structure to include a field that would be used for a classification level of the file. Had to implement two library functions, get and set classification, that, assuming you follow standard permissions, then you can get the classification of a file or set the classification of a file. So some of the things that had to be added, the only things that I added personally were the library functions, the get and set classification.c, along with the man files, get classification and set classification. Files that I modified, so we'll go here. So in sysminix, in the libraries, I added the get classification.c as well as the set classification.c, and I added them to the make file in order for them to compile with the rest of the libraries. Beyond that, for these libraries, in user source include, I had to update the Unistandard library to have the prototypes for get and set classification. Let's see, beyond that, so that takes care of the libraries. Let's go back to the servers now. So what had to be done was, in the libraries, the library itself will make a system call. So if we look here, say classification, the library first opens the file based on the file name input, and that will provide a pointer, which then we can use to get the file number. And then we're going to the system call. So now we're going to be inside VFS. Inside VFS, I decided not to add a file and just modify one that's pre-existing. So I modified protect.c. This is where I added my classify system call. This obtains the effective user ID from the PM server, compares that with, well, it checks for if you're root or if you are the file owner. And if you're not, then you are not allowed to set any other permission you're able to set or get, assuming any other case. So what this is doing inside VFS is making a request. So this request classification here, which I have added inside of request.c as well in VFS. And I did this just to keep with the just the general flow of how Minix files work. So I added this request. This request takes in an endpoint inode number, this get or set boolean, which determines whether it's a get or set, because I use one file per library call, and the new level. Then I set this information inside of a message, and then I send this. I do a send receive, which will then invoke MFS. So if we go over to MFS, well, I also had to modify table.c and pro.h for the prototypes as well as the requests inside of the table. Inside MFS, I modified the misc.c. I just honestly thought miscellaneous, but it's probably something else. So this is where I actually do the heart of the code. So I obtain the inode based on the inode number I've passed in, and this code here more or less does the allocation on zone 9, which is the first available resource in the inode we have to use and modify. So once all of that is allocated, then I determine if I'm getting or if I'm setting. If I'm setting, then I set the zone 9 to be whatever the new level that I've passed in, and I simply return that value. Otherwise, if I get, then I'm just reading the data and returning it. And then since I'm modifying the file system, whenever I get through here, I'm doing a few checks here that basically just mark this file as dirty. So mark the inode and block the disk block to be dirty. So once basically once that's done, everything is just going to pop back up through all the way to the libraries and back to the user. As well, I had to modify proto.h and table.c as well. Another file that, because I added this fs in the requests, I had to modify a vfsif file, which is within user source include Minix. So what that looks like, basically a list of request fields between VFS and the physical file system. So what I did was I just took the base, the VFS base, which is the first one, and added the request classification. And so this corresponds to the MFS table as well. So that pretty much sums it up. I'm glad that everything is finally working, and yeah, that's it.